Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Speak for Success podcast. And today we have Dave Stokes, community manager at DBeaver. Welcome, Dave. How are you doing
Thank you.
today?
I'm doing very well, almost as good as you are.
Thank you for coming. Dave, could you please share a bit about your career path and how did you come to work at DBeaver? Where did you work previously?
Many years ago, I was working at a company, and the folks who made our hardware and software decided they weren't going to do that anymore. They were going to have more hardware, but you needed to upgrade, and it's very expensive. So I started working with this new stuff called open source software. And from there, I ended up taking a certification exam for the MySQL database administrator test. And I missed it by 1 point, and a lot of the questions were horrible. So I saw that they had an opening for a PHP programmer in the MySQL AB certification group. So I wrote a letter that was half complaining about the way the questions were worded, and half, hey, I'm a good PHP programmer, please give me a job. Got the job. My boss came over, trained me, and a month later he left the company. So suddenly I'm managing certification at MySQL AB. Sun Microsystems steps in, buys MySQL AB. A year and a quarter later, Oracle buys MySQL. Well, Sun to get MySQL and a couple other properties. Then I moved into community management for MySQL. Left for a brief time for a startup that was doing a columnar storage engine that's now part of MariaDB. Went back to Oracle, did community management work. Then I went to Percona doing community management work basically for their database products. And then since June, I've been doing that for DBeaver, which is a very interesting universal database tool. If you're playing with more than one database, which everyone is these days, it's often frustrating because you're in PSQL and you want to remember, how do I do this that I do this way in the MySQL shell? This gives you a consistent interface. It's a great way to port data from, say, like MySQL to Postgres or Oracle to Maria. It also has an AI assistant where you basically can write queries in English and soon to be other languages. So rather than trying to figure out, okay, how do I get the top 5 customers out of this demographics set? You say, hey, give me the top 5 customers, and boom, there's your data. It's a really multifaceted product, and every week I'm finding new features to it. So it's really exciting.
Sounds great. And at what stage of your career you started to give talks at conferences?
I was still in college, and there used to be a computer company called Digital Equipment Corporation, and one of their bi-yearly meetings was up the road from where I lived at a convention center across the street from Disneyland. So it was great. They'd rent out the entire Disneyland for 3,000 nerds. But I was talking about how to port from the Ristus E operating system on a PDP to Ultrix, which is their version of Unix. And this is part of my march towards open source and being able to look at the code to see what's going on there. Then several years later, I'm living in Dallas and I'm going to the local Linux users group meeting, and they wanted someone to speak on a subject, basically DSL lines for coming to houses. What do you need to set one up? So I got up on stage and I showed them what my experiences were, and from there on, there's other things I'd talk about. And when I got hired by MySQL AB, part of my thing was talking about certification and the new features in MySQL. And from then on, there were times where I was speaking 30 times, 35 times a year to various audiences. Um, it's one of those things where a good audience is really electrifying. For a brief part of my career, I had been a stand-up comic and failed miserably at that. But there's something about being in front of an audience and you see 2 or 3 sets of eyes in the audience that's really connecting with your message. Conversely, I've also given other talks, and you can tell 2 sentences in that the audience is basically waiting for lunchtime or dinner time or the cocktail hour, and you have no feedback with the audience. That's always horrifying.
Do you think public speaking really helped your career, or was it like just a pleasure for you to be in front of the audience, to see this energy, or it really like benefited somehow?
It helps. It's like teaching. You really need to know your subject well, and you also have to need to judge your audience. So if you're doing a basic tutorial on setting up database schemas, there's certain things you have to cover. You know, data types, how things relate between tables that you know you have to cover, and you start digging into it, and there's always something that catches you that go, ooh, I'm not really as good on that as I should be. So you dig into that, really helps. The other thing about public speaking is occasionally you'll run into a situation like I was fairly new on the MySQL community team, and Richard Hipp, the father of SQLite, gets up on one of my talks and says, "Hey, when is MySQL going to have CTEs?" What the hell is a CTE? And it's kind of like, well, I don't know. I can look at the thing and get back to you, but we've done pretty good without them, so I'm not quite sure it's an urgent priority. So I literally get off stage, and when things calm down, I said, okay, what is a CTE? And I start looking at it going, ooh, I wish we had this. And start bugging some of the engineers. And I'm not going to take any claim for MySQL getting CTEs because it happened many years later. But it's one of those things where the audience catches you by surprise every so often, and you have to admit, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Another great benefit is I had a gentleman who was coming to my talks for a couple of years, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, Dave, got a question to see if MySQL can do something for us." And well, what is it? Well, we're trying to encrypt this piece of data, and the vendor we've been talking to can't do it. Can you do it? And I said, well, I'm 99% sure we can. Let me talk to the program manager because there's some stuff we haven't announced yet that I want to make sure gets covered. Called the program manager up for that. And I said, oh, yeah, we haven't announced that. The announcement comes next week. So I called back the first person and I said, yeah, we're going to have an announcement next week. If you want to talk to the program manager, here's his name, number, and email. You can contact him. By the way, who are you working for? He goes, well, I'm working for the Center of Disease Control, and we're just starting all this COVID research, and we need to be able to have an encrypted database. It's like, cha-ching. So Oracle made a lot of money off that contract, even though there was no way to trace back from what my activities were to them actually getting the payment. But it was one of those things where it pays off. The other thing is when you're talking open source, is you run into folks who are doing amazing things with your product. You know, from Percona, you run into someone, and, oh, what do you do? Oh, we're this little business that you've never heard of. Well, what do you do? And they start talking um, about things, jaw-dropping technology that they're developing or services that they're doing. And the only reason they can do it at the price point they can is because your product is just exactly what they need. So.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, why is it worth for companies to invest in public speaking and send speakers to tech conferences? But I think you already answered that.
Well, I may not look like it, but I actually have a master's in business administration. And one of the things they drummed into us is in good times, you should advertise, and bad times, you must advertise. And a lot of companies get caught up in, we spend $1 here, where's our return on investment? Well, community management can't be measured that way. No matter how many folks I've run into who claim to be able to do so, they don't really get the metrics back. People who don't know about your product will never use it. People who don't know certain features of your product will never use it. So you have someone who's like me, who's part town crier, part jester, going out there and talking about, hey, did you know you can do this? Do you know how to encrypt this? Do you know how to move this? Have you seen this new feature and the new commands for the new feature? And a lot of engineers and technical managers do not have the time or the energy to go out there and read Slashdot, the register, everything on Stack Overflow to try to keep current. And there's a lot of noise to the signal there. But if they can get to a conference, or they can see a webinar, or they can hear some other thing I've done or read a blog, they can find out about it. And if you don't have someone out there promoting your product, you literally have no one out there promoting your product to the right audience.
Yes, I agree, definitely. But where is the line in your talk when you prepare for a talk between promoting product and giving value in the talk, not being too commercial?
It's hard. The one of my current talks is using the AI assistant in DBeaver, which I mentioned earlier. It lets you write queries in English, soon to be other languages. You can put in a query and say, what does this thing do? Or someone throws a database over the wall and says, hey, this other group's been using this and they're making great strides. We need to incorporate this. And you have no idea what the tables or the queries. So you could actually have the AI investigate and report back to you, say, oh, this is a series of tables and these tables link this way, or this query figures out the top revenue producing cities, broken down by, 98-day intervals. It's one of those things where, I have to talk product, I have to mention the product name, and no one else quite does it that way. So it's going to be very vendor specific, which turns off a lot of shows. But it's one of those things where if you're the only one doing it, you kind of have to do that. The other thing is I try to do general talks. I have a talk coming up at All Things Open on what happens after you say insert such and such into a Postgres database. What actually happens? Now, does that directly sell DBeaver? No, I'll show some DBeaver features on doing that, but it's more like a general database talk. And then from there you can say, oh, by the way, if you're working with, multiple databases or you need to do this specifically, this is one of your options, look at DBeaver. It's kind of a fine line. Now like PHP and Ruby on Rails conference where I talk about MySQL, they know you're talking about MySQL and they know you're representing the company and they expect a certain amount of pitch. But I always try to keep it mainly on features and, look at our new color scheme. Our new color scheme will make you 44% more productive. No, it's not. Try to keep it on the nuts and bolts.
And I'm curious, when you start to prepare for entirely new talk, how do you start? You start with writing an abstract, you start with writing an outline, or start with slides. If you give an advice for a person who starts to work on his talk and want to start public speaking, how would you advise him to work on his talk?
I usually start off an abstract. I have a rough idea for a talk. And from there, I'll submit it and then I'll start outlining just in case they come back and say, hey, we want to hear this. It's hard when you submit an abstract and you forgot what your salient points were that you're going to cover. So it helps you write the abstract out in a Google Doc and put down a couple bullet points of what you want to talk about. That way they come back and say, hey, in 3 weeks, you're speaking on this subject. You have at least 2 or 3 slides done. Next thing is you have to look at the time slot. I'm notorious for speaking way too fast and I have to force myself to slow down. So if I have a 30-minute speaking slot and I want to have 10 minutes of questions and answers, I'll figure, okay, that's roughly a slide a minute. So that's roughly 20 slides. Opening about me and the thank you slide, that's 3 out of 20. How do I divide up what I want to say over 15 or 16 slides? And go from there. What's rougher is when you have a talk that you're used to doing in a 50-minute slot that you want to speak 40 minutes on, and you either have to do a 2-hour tutorial or a 20-minute talk. How do you compress it? And once again, on the compressed version, you go to the main subjects, the main bullet points. On the longer ones, sometimes you can fill in stuff that you couldn't mention. Oh, by the way, when you're using the array data type in Postgres, here are some functions not exactly related to what we're doing today that you'll find useful when manipulating this data when you're programming. The other thing I'll recommend doing is read your slides out loud. I tend to write them on a white background and then transfer them over to the official theme later. But write them down and then read them out loud and see if they sound good to your ear. Because there are times you'll be saying something and you'll realize, I skipped over something, or that doesn't sound right. I need to go back and double check that it really works that way. Or this doesn't flow. How do I make this, more seamless? How do I make it transition better?
I think it's a good advice. And do you have any advice on how to get your talk accepted at the conferences?
It helps to look at the about section. You know, hey, we're doing a 3-day conference on using a certain type of processor in this way, and you don't know anything about that, and you see that, oh, they have a database tracker, there's something you know about. On something like that, I'll put it in a basic class or a basic talk, something like, the basics of using a database on this architecture. Then a little bit more intermediate, some finer points. And then if I have time, I might put it in a more complex advanced talk. But you have to make sure that you're talking to the right audience. Last year I had a talk where they actually said they wanted advanced database subjects. So I submitted a talk that was an advanced Postgres talk, and people came into the room, and I'm going, my God, there's a lot of folks in Oklahoma City that really want to learn about Postgres. This is a great market. And then about 10 minutes in, I realized that the only other talk going on was absolutely worse than them. And these folks were not database folks. They weren't really interested. They just didn't want to be in the other talk running at the same time. So sometimes your best plans go awry. So you never know. But it helps to know your audience. What are they looking for? I liked speaking at PHP conferences because you had folks who are writing cutting edge code, and PHP has had kind of an amazing development cycle. For 30 years, people would say, yeah, PHP is good, but it's going to be gone in a year because we're going to use coding, we're going to use Cold Fusion, or we're going to use this. But the folks who ran the development of the language listened to their users and figured out what they needed. And I'd come in and I'd talk about, best ways to do something in a database, and they'd listen to it and they'd take in the message. So after a while, I realized that, they're looking for the technical stuff. They're not really looking for the basics. So I learned to put in intermediate and advanced talks, and, made sure it was on something that was relevant to their programming language.
Makes sense, yeah. And if you speak at online or virtual events, do you adjust somehow the material of your talk? Is it different to speak at online event rather than at offline event?
I like live events, even though I've had fire alarms and people running through the room and electrical malfunctions and blackouts. I like being in front of an audience. And an audience, someone will ask a question, or you'll see someone give you a puzzled look, and you'll be able to dig into it. And I usually tell my audiences, hey, if you have a question, please bring it up right away. If it's something I'm going to cover in a few minutes, I'll tell you that. But I'd rather have your question answered than to have you be anxious the entire talk about trying to get in there, and the last minute we don't, and you walk away and I walk away, we don't get the thing answered. Some online talks where you can follow the Q&A, which unfortunately with Zoom is harder than it should be. I try to break every so often to see if there's any questions out there. But it's just not the same as having a live audience.
Yeah, I agree. What I'm thinking about is you've spoken at so many conferences over the years of your career. And how do you see the evolution of the conferences? Did their role change somehow?
Well, what's funny, it was pre-COVID. The open source conferences were slowly growing. Things like Scale, All Things Open, FOSDEM. Well, FOSDEM's its own universe to itself. They're really building up momentum. Post-COVID, things are slowly getting back. I've seen a lot more acceptance of online conferences because people just can't travel. Either their bosses don't want to pay for it, there's fears about politics or contagion or something like that. So I think we're going to see a lot more virtual shows because it's a lot easier to book your own office than it is to get a flight, get to the airport, make a change of flights, get someplace else, get checked in the hotel room, then find your way to the venue. The other thing is the past couple of years, especially in the US and Canada after COVID, is the promoters are still trying to get the audience back that they had before pre-COVID, and they're struggling. They're coming back. Shows like All Things Open 10 years ago was 300 people, and this year they're expecting 5,000 people. So it's coming back. If you've never been to a computer show like that, it's worth the investment. Um, Not so much for the talks, although there's a lot of great material there and the ability to talk to the vendors. It's the hallway track, the meetings that you don't schedule that you run into and you hear someone talking about an issue that you have, where you can actually say, okay, how did you solve that? What, I have this problem. How did you get past that? Oh, you didn't do that. You went this way. And plus you make some lifelong friendships. And even for a horrible introvert, like I don't appear to be, but I actually am underneath, you run into people who are doing amazing things, and it's inspiring, and they'll give you ideas and you'll give them ideas. So it's a synergy that just pops up just from sitting next to someone at lunch and, hey, where are you from? Oh, no, no, no. Oh, I use your your XYZ. Oh, next month we're getting this. It really builds a fire under you.
Yeah, that's the big value of offline events. I agree. Mm, maybe any common mistakes that you see other speakers do on stage when you come to talks of other speakers?
Big one I see for a lot of engineers is they want to read their slides. I tend to have what they call a wall of letters. I tend to have too much detail on my slides. But when you go up there and there's someone has a Lambda function on the screen and they're reading it off to you, it's kind of like, you don't need to do that. The other thing is pacing. A lot of engineers get into that horrible, you take the 15% of this value here and you multiply it by this here, which will give you this. Put some life into it. Use dynamics, get soft, get loud, use your hands. Try to put some humor in there. Don't force the humor, but if something is obviously funny, bringing up last fall in Austria, we were talking about the value of open source and how these companies like AWS and Meta are talking about how much money they're spending on open source software. Well, the money spent on keeping Jeff Bezos's yacht running for 6 months is less than what he was giving to open source projects. And that kind of gives you a nice nice leveling of, hey, you're doing great stuff, but we're still below the yacht.
Yeah. Do you have any like personal preferences in conferences, except for PHP ones, which you already mentioned?
I love open source. The Linux fests are always good. If you're a tech nerd and have never been to a Linux fest, um, Scale in California, Confu in Montreal, All Things Open in Raleigh. There's a lot of smaller ones like the Texas Linux Fest that are really worth spending a day or two at. They're fun. Some of the bigger shows like Oracle Cloud World and AWS reInvent, for me personally, they're too large, but they're a great opportunity if you've never been to one. The Linux International shows are fantastic. They're a little pricey unless you get a boss who's paying for it. Paying out of your own pocket is kind of crazy. And then there are shows. The main one is probably FOSDEM, which if you've never been to FOSDEM, imagine the second coldest weekend in Brussels, Belgium, during the middle of February, and they take over a college campus. There's no registration. You just show up. They don't know how many people show up. And all the talks are in different rooms. The talks are usually 30 minutes, which means someone will talk for 25 minutes. And as soon as their talk's done, people have to run across campus to the other rooms. It's its own craziness. You've been there, you know that it's pure mayhem. And that's kind of its own set of craziness. After that, I'd have to say All Things Open, Scale, some of the smaller Linux fests. It depends. they all have their merits, and I can honestly say there's only a few shows that I'll never go back to, mainly because either the venue's in a really bad part of town and I value my life, or it's just not the type of show I'd want to go to again.
And at what shows people can meet you, maybe this season?
First one is in 2 weeks at Texas DevOps Days, Dallas. Going to All Things Open. I have a couple other shows that I'm waiting to hear back on. Next year, I'm hoping to be at all the big shows. I'm on the board that helps put together Scale, which is an amazing show. It's the only big open source show in Southern California, so you get a lot of the businesses you don't see at other shows in the US, you know, the Disneys, some of the bigger defense contractors. And of course, it's in the middle of the craziness that is the LA Basin. So you'll run into folks from various TV shows who are filming next door. So it's an interesting show.
You have busy months ahead of you.
Yes, I do. It's one of those things where on a Monday, I will literally look at my calendar and say, okay, what's this week? What's next week? And what's the week after that? I have the Postgres conference in New York City coming up. And it's like, I know in the back of my mind it's there, but I forget, when do I have to leave for the airport? When do I have to pack? I got to do laundry. That sort of stuff. Well, you know how it is. You know, you at the last minute, you always forget something. And, you know, oh, did I
Yeah.
bring batteries for my pointer? No, I didn't. Okay, where do I get batteries at 3 in the morning in Cancun? You just try to get away from that.
And if you give just one advice for a person who is going to present his first talk, what that would be?
The first thing is the people are there to see you succeed. They want you to succeed. They want you to give a great talk. Even if it's a mediocre talk, they want you to be able to deliver it because they want to hear you. There's a lot of people who are paranoid and, you know, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to speak. I'm going to have problems. I don't know everything about the subject. If you don't know everything about the subject, say, hey, this is my personal experience. You know, this is a case study of me porting from this to that or installing this. And know that they want you to do good and they're there for you. They're not there to heckle you. The other thing is all these things from local user groups to the biggest conferences want speakers. They need speakers. You are what makes the show possible. People pay to come hear talks, and you're there to give out information. And the shows usually realize that, you know, if you're a first time speaker, you know, maybe at a big show, they're going to be a little cautious, but your local user group needs someone to get up there and talk about something. I mean, even the local WordPress group wants to know about something that you can do. And you go there and maybe you talk for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And maybe someone says, hey, if you add this, you know, you can make a bigger talk. Just go do it. The other thing is find out where they're having lightning talks. It's usually a 5-minute talk. Most times you're limited in the number of slides, but that's not a big problem. If you're at a conference and they say, hey, we're going to have lightning talks, and you have something you're fairly passionate about, and you know you have 3 minutes of material, you can go up there and do 5 minutes, no problem. So throw yourself out there. And remember, these people really do want you to do good. They're cheerleaders for you. They want you to succeed. So go out there and do it.
I think that's a great advice. I wish I had this advice when I was a first-time speaker because I was really scared. Yeah, and you just sometimes you don't think of other people that they really want you to succeed. You just see your failure and you don't expect, you don't think about that.
Yeah.
But very
Another thing is if you're speaking at a conference that's in English and you're not a native English speaker, don't worry about it. There are sometimes sometimes the best advice I've gotten from people who are fracturing the language, and they do a wonderful thing. We worked with a gentleman at Bracona who was from one country, lived in another country where neither required English, and he'd come to America, and people just flocked to his talks. His accent was a little bit weird, but you got used to it quickly. His phrases were a little bit different, but they really accentuated his points. And it's one of those things where, once again, they want you to succeed. So if you're thinking, oh my God, I don't speak English perfectly. I've been speaking English for 60 some odd years now, and I've still got a long way to go. And of course, I moved to Texas where they have their own version of English. So that dog just don't hunt.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave, for coming to us today. I
Thank you for
appreciate
having
your
me.
time. Thank you.
Thank you, and have a good one. And please keep in touch.